On the distant planet of Vorrak Prime, a dense, untamed world of emerald jungles and cascading golden rivers, the Vorrakai warriors stood still, their massive frames trembling with a mix of dread and determination. The Vorrakai were legendary across the stars, known for their towering stature, shimmering carapace armor, and unparalleled skill with energy blades. They had conquered hostile moons, tamed molten plains, and crushed armies that dared oppose their imperious rule. Yet now, they were terrified. And for good reason. The creature they faced, simply referred to as the Maw, was unlike any foe the Vorrakai had ever encountered. It moved like a shadow given form, a beast whose very silhouette defied understanding. Its claws, capable of shearing through Vorrakai armor, left gnarled scars across the jungle floors. It was relentless and hungry, an apex predator in a world already brimming with peril. Many warriors had ventured deep into the jungles to hunt the Maw. None had returned. For the proud Vorrakai, it was not simply a beast, it was humiliation embodied. General Rithok, a commanding figure among the Vorrakai, gazed across the clearing. His sharp, silver eyes swept over the warriors assembling under his command. For days, their search parties had dwindled, their resolve worn thin by the growing realization that brute force, their typical approach, was utterly useless against this adversary. Nearby, one of the Vorrakai scouts, smaller in stature, but just as armored, emerged from the jungle. "It is still out there," the scout reported, his voice sharp and breathless. "It waits. It watches." "Then we are still the prey," General Rithok growled in response. His pride was as heavy as the ceremonial battle axe strapped to his back. Unacceptable. Yet before he could rouse his warriors into another doomed charge, a shrill, nasal voice broke through the tense silence. "I think I see the problem here." The gathered warriors turned their heads as one. Emerging from a battered Vorrakai dropship, an object far too large for him, was the last thing anyone on Vorrak Prime expected to see. A human. His name was Danny Fields, and he looked thoroughly out of place. He was scrawny by comparison, standing just over 6 feet tall, with rumpled cargo pants, a sweat-streaked t-shirt, and a pair of reflective sunglasses pushed halfway down his nose. At his side dangled a makeshift tool belt that rattled with suspiciously improvised gadgets. If the Vorrakai were noble warriors in glistening armor, Danny looked like someone who had stumbled out of a hardware store at 2 a.m., confused about where he parked his ship. General Rithok stared him down, his mandibles twitching. "Explain yourself, human." Danny pushed his sunglasses up with a grin. "I'm here to help. Solve your little monster problem." The warriors murmured, some bristling at the very idea that a soft-boned creature could offer any kind of solution. Vorrakai culture was built upon strength, endurance, and power. Humans were seen as flimsy, awkward beings who got by on luck more than anything else. How, then, was this one here, grinning like he had just walked into a barbecue? "We do not need your assistance," Rithok replied, though his tone carried more doubt than he intended. "This creature cannot be bested by something as small and fragile as you." Danny whistled. "Ah, classic mistake. You think strength is all that matters. I get it. Big claws, big teeth, scary shadow monster, easy to panic. But you're missing something important." The Vorrakai weren't sure whether to laugh, glare, or throw Danny back into his dropship. Instead, they stared at him. Danny took this as an invitation to continue. He clapped his hands together, making an obnoxious pop. "You see, you guys are fighting this thing wrong. It's like trying to arm wrestle a truck. Sure, you can try. You'll lose, but you can try. I'm not here to arm wrestle it, I'm here to outsmart it." Rithok took a threatening step forward, his voice a low rumble. "Do you mean to say you believe yourself smarter than us?" Danny backpedaled instantly. "Whoa, no need for chest pounding. I'm not saying I'm smarter than anyone, just that I've got a few tricks you might not have considered. And, no offense, but judging by the giant claw marks all over the place, I'm guessing you need those tricks right about now." For a long moment, Rithok simply stared at him. Danny met his gaze unflinchingly, though it wasn't bravado. He had a way of looking utterly calm in moments when common sense dictated otherwise. Finally, Rethok waved a massive hand. Let him speak, he grunted, though his tone made it clear that Danny's life would hang in the balance if this solution proved worthless. Danny grinned. Perfect. Now I'm going to need two things. First, I need someone to show me where this thing hangs out its territory, nests, feeding zones, you name it. And second, does anyone here have snacks? I work better when I'm not starving. The warriors looked at each other, baffled. One of them hesitantly tossed Danny a piece of Vorrakai ration, a dense, mineral-heavy cube that could power a warrior for days. Danny stared at it for a second, shrugged, and tossed it in his mouth. Crunchy. Needs salt, he said, chewing loudly. General Rethok watched him with growing disbelief. This is the creature who will save us, he muttered under his breath. Still, desperation had a way of opening even the most stubborn of minds. Begrudgingly, Rethok motioned for his warriors to lead Danny deeper into the jungle. As they trudged into the emerald shadows, the Vorrakai warriors exchanged uneasy glances. How could such a small, unimpressive creature hope to best the maw? Danny, however, seemed entirely unbothered by their skepticism. In fact, he whistled as he walked, stopping now and then to inspect claw marks, footprints, and broken trees. Occasionally, he'd scratch his chin, mutter things like "Isham," interesting, or classic predator behavior, as if he were admiring some fine piece of art. Finally, one of the younger warriors, unable to contain his confusion any longer, spoke up. "What are you doing?" Danny turned, hands on his hips, looking for its weak spot. The warrior blinked. Weak spot. Danny smirked. Every monster has one. To the Vorrakai, those words rang as improbable as they were absurd. For days they had fought the maw with every weapon, every ounce of strength, and every strategy in their considerable arsenal. They had set traps, launched ambushes, and faced it head-on. Nothing had worked. Yet here was this human, striding confidently through the jungle as though he knew something they didn't. And perhaps, they realized with a mix of hope and disbelief, he did. The jungle grew denser as Danny and the Vorrakai warriors moved deeper into the maw's domain. The air grew heavy and humid, weighed down by the distant screeches of unseen creatures and the unsettling silence between those calls. The Vorrakai warriors kept their energy blades close, their armored shoulders tense. Danny, however, looked like a tourist on a nature hike. "Okay, so what we're looking at here," Danny said, stopping suddenly to examine a series of massive claw marks etched into a boulder, "is a predator that's not just hunting you, it's playing with you." Playing, growled General Rethok, who had begrudgingly taken the lead to guide Danny through the territory. "Do you mean to suggest this beast mocks us?" "Yup." "What kind of?" Danny replied, crouching to touch the scars in the rock. "It's toying with you the way a cat toys with a mouse. It's confident, which is bad news for you, but good news for me." Rethok's mandibles flared with irritation. "I do not see how any of this is good." Danny stood and slapped the boulder as if congratulating it on a job well done. "Because my giant shiny friend, an overconfident predator, makes mistakes," he turned to face the gathered warriors, gesturing wildly as he spoke. "You guys have been fighting this thing head-on like you're trying to win an arm wrestling contest. But the maw doesn't care how strong you are, it already knows it's stronger. You need to think differently. You need to fight smart." "Humans speak in riddles," one of the warriors muttered. Danny clapped his hands together, startling the group. "Right, time for a demonstration. General, do you still have that ridiculously huge battle axe?" Rethok scowled. "Of course." "Perfect. Throw it at me." The jungle went deathly silent. Rethok narrowed his silver eyes. "Throw it. At you." Yet Danny replied casually, as though asking someone to pass the salt. "Just toss it. I'll dodge." The Vorrakai warriors exchanged stunned glances. This human was clearly insane. Rethok, however, could see no trickery in Danny's expression, just an unnerving amount of confidence. "If you wish to meet your end," human Rethok growled, unstrapping the massive weapon from his back, "then so be it." Hefting the ceremonial battle axe, a weapon that could crush boulders, Rithok pulled back and hurled it through the air with all his considerable strength. It spun like a bladed comet, whistling as it cut through the humid air. Danny grinned, bent his knees, and ducked. The axe whizzed over his head, embedding itself deep into a tree behind him with a thunk that rattled the ground. Danny turned back to face the stunned warriors, brushing dirt off his knees with exaggerated care. "See that," he said, pointing over his shoulder at the axe. "You could have wiped me out just now, but I moved. Strength doesn't matter if you can't hit your target." He jabbed a finger toward Rithok. "That's your problem with the Maw. You're relying on brute force when you need finesse. You need to be quicker, smarter, and trickier than it is." Rithok's fists tightened at his sides. "And how do you propose we accomplish that?" Danny grinned and pulled a small, battered tablet from his tool belt. He tapped on its cracked screen, and a holographic map flickered to life, displaying their position in the jungle. "We're going to set a trap. A smart one. But first, I need to understand how this thing hunts." "It hunts everything," one of the warriors snapped. "It does not discriminate." Danny shook his head. No predators have patterns. They choose. Even the biggest, scariest ones don't just charge around eating rocks and trees. There's always a method to their madness." He turned to Rithok, the holographic map hovering between them. "Tell me where you've seen it most, where it attacks, where it retreats, and where it avoids entirely. We're going to find its weak spot." Rithok regarded him carefully, his earlier irritation softened by a strange sense of curiosity. "And if this trap fails?" "Then I'll probably get eaten," Danny replied cheerfully, stuffing the tablet back into his belt. "But let's think positive." The Vorrakai warriors muttered among themselves, bewildered by this human's flippant attitude towards certain death. Rithok shook his head, signaling for the others to follow. "Come, I will show you the hunting grounds." They reached the Maw's feeding grounds by sunset, a vast clearing littered with the remains of massive jungle beasts. The air stank of decay, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the ground. Something about this place was wrong. Even the Vorrakai warriors, clad in their shimmering armor, seemed smaller here. Danny knelt down, picking up a shard of bone that had been sheared clean through. Precision strike. Looks like our monster isn't just strong, it's surgical. That's rare." "What does it matter how it kills?" one warrior asked, his voice tight. "It kills us. That is all that matters." "It matters because it tells me where to hit back," Danny replied, examining the bone. "See, the way it slices through everything tells me it's relying on speed and sharpness. Those claws are deadly, but I'm guessing they're thin, sharp enough to cut through steel, but fragile if you apply the right pressure." Rithok tilted his head. "You guess." Danny stood, dusting his hands. "Science, baby. You don't need to know everything about the monster, just enough to make it regret showing up in the first place." "And how do you plan to do that?" Danny grinned. "Simple. We're going to make it mad." By the time night fell, Danny had enlisted the reluctant warriors to help him build what could only be described as the strangest trap in Vorrakai history. Using salvaged parts from Danny's dropship, Vorrakai energy weapon components, and an impressive amount of duct tape because, of course, Danny carried duct tape, they constructed a sprawling series of decoys, tripwires, and bait stations that covered the clearing. Rithok watched, arms crossed, as Danny worked late into the night. "You believe this? Contraption will fool them all." Danny straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Not for long. The point isn't to fool it, it's to lure it into the open. Once it's here, I'll show you how to break it." "And what will you do?" Danny pulled a pair of sunglasses out of his pocket, even though it was pitch dark, and slid them onto his face. "I'll do what humans do best. Improvise." The Vorrakai warriors stared at him, silent. For all their skepticism, they couldn't deny one thing: the humans' confidence was contagious. As the first haunting cry of the Maw echoed through the jungle, they found themselves hoping, however foolishly, that this bizarre creature called a human might succeed where their mightiest warriors had failed. And deep in the shadows, unseen eyes watched, drawing closer. The Vorrakai warriors stood silent in the clearing, their muscles coiled with tension. In the starlit gloom, Danny's trap shimmered with promise and insanity. Dozens of devices made from scraps, energy cells, and Vorrakai weapons had been scattered strategically across the clearing. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos wires tangled among vines, reflective panels propped up against rocks, and tripwires nearly invisible in the undergrowth. But to Danny, it was a symphony. The key to a good trap, Danny whispered, crouching beside General Rethok, is making it seem like a terrible idea to walk into it. But the maw? Oh, it's cocky. It'll come anyway. Rethok grunted, his hand resting on the hilt of his energy blade. This beast fears nothing. Exactly, Danny replied with a sly grin. That's why it'll fall for this. From deep within the jungle, a low, bone-rattling growl rolled through the air. The Vorrakai warriors shifted nervously, their armor clinking softly as they instinctively raised their weapons. The sound seemed to reverberate through the ground itself, growing louder, closer, until even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "It comes," Rethok growled, mandibles twitching. "Great," Danny muttered, popping a piece of Vorrakai ration into his mouth, as if he weren't crouched in the middle of a monster's feeding ground. Showtime. The maw emerged from the jungle like a living shadow. Its form was massive and unnerving. Its body seemed to shift and writhe, as though it couldn't quite decide where it began or ended. Twin rows of razor-sharp claws gleamed as it moved, slicing effortlessly through the undergrowth. Its glowing crimson eyes fixed on the clearing, and the Vorrakai warriors tensed. Even General Rethok, a proud warrior of countless battles, gripped his weapon tighter. For the first time in its long reign of terror, the maw hesitated. Danny rose to his feet, slowly and deliberately, hands shoved into his pockets. "Well, there you are," he called out casually, his voice loud enough to echo across the clearing. "I was starting to think you were scared of us." The Vorrakai gasped audibly. "Has he lost his mind?" one warrior hissed. "Likely," Rethok muttered, though he couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene unfolding before him. The maw's crimson eyes narrowed, locking onto Danny. It let out a sound, a horrible, guttural growl that shook the ground beneath their feet. Danny didn't move. Yeah, you're terrifying," Danny said, waving dismissively. "Big claws, spooky noises, I get it. But guess what?" He spread his arms wide, grinning like a madman. "You're not as scary as you think." The maw lunged. The Vorrakai warriors shouted in alarm, raising their weapons, but Danny was already moving. He bolted across the clearing, weaving between his makeshift traps with the grace of someone who absolutely shouldn't be that fast. The maw pursued, its claws tearing through the ground as it thundered after him. The beast swiped at him once, twice, but Danny ducked and rolled, evading each blow by inches. He was grinning like a kid playing tag, though sweat streaked his face. "Now," Danny shouted. The Vorrakai warriors, still unsure of what they were doing, sprang into action. Rethok barked commands and energy weapons hummed to life. The maw snarled, its attention flicking briefly to the armored warriors as they fired bursts of blinding light across the clearing. But Danny wasn't done yet. He skidded to a halt in the middle of the clearing, pulling a battered metal cylinder from his tool belt. He pressed a button, and the device emitted a shrill, high-pitched whine. The maw roared in fury, claws raking at the ground as it charged straight at him. "Come on, big guy," Danny muttered through gritted teeth, holding his ground. "Just a little closer." As the maw closed the distance, its massive form casting a shadow over him, Danny hurled the device straight at its head. It struck with a metallic clang, and suddenly boom. A blinding flash erupted, followed by an ear-splitting screech. The Vorrakai warriors shielded their eyes as the clearing lit up like a small sun. The maw howled, rearing back in confusion and pain, its claws flailing wildly as it stumbled. Danny was already moving. Now Rethok. General Rethok understood immediately. He signaled his warriors, and a series of heavy energy nets hidden beneath leaves and tripwires sprang upward, wrapping around the maw's massive frame. The beast roared, thrashing against the nets, but the more it struggled, the tighter they held. Danny ran back toward the warriors, panting hard but grinning triumphantly. Gotcha. The Vorrakai watched in stunned silence as the great terror of Vorrak Prime flailed helplessly within its bindings. For the first time in memory, the maw looked beatable. General Rithok stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. You have subdued it. Technically, we subdued it, Danny corrected, hands on his knees as he caught his breath. Teamwork makes the dream work, buddy. The warriors erupted in cheers, pounding their weapons against the ground in celebration. Even Rithok allowed a rare smile to creep across his face. For years they had been hunted by this beast, humiliated and powerless against its relentless attacks. But now, thanks to a human and his absurd plan, the maw had been captured. Danny flopped onto the ground, arms spread wide. Man, I need a nap, and maybe a sandwich. Rithok approached him, towering over the human with newfound respect. You are remarkable, Danny Fields. You have shown us that strength is not always the answer. Danny smirked, eyes closed. Told you. Sometimes you just need duct tape and a little confidence. Rithok tilted his head. What is duct tape? Danny cracked one eye open. Oh, buddy, I'll show you. It's humanity's greatest weapon. The Vorrakai warriors laughed a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the clearing. For the first time in a long time, the jungle felt just a little less dangerous. But Danny sat up suddenly, his grin fading as he stared at the maw, still thrashing against its bonds. Hold on, it's still too early to celebrate. Rithok frowned. What do you mean? The beast is captured. Sure, Danny said slowly, but we need to figure out why it's so aggressive. A predator doesn't go berserk for no reason. Something's wrong here. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Rithok nodded. Then we will investigate. You have earned our trust, human. Danny grinned again, standing and brushing himself off. Glad to hear it. Now someone get me a snack. I think we've got a mystery to solve. As the warriors laughed and began to regroup, the maw quieted in its bindings. Its glowing crimson eyes locked onto Danny for a moment, unblinking, and something passed between them, a challenge, perhaps, or a question. Danny stared back, his easy grin faltering just slightly. Whatever had driven this monster to terrorize the Vorrakai, Danny knew one thing for sure: their work wasn't done yet. The Vorrakai camp glowed faintly beneath the rising twin moons of Vorrak Prime. Danny sat perched on an upturned crate, fiddling with a battered tablet as the warriors milled around him. Despite their celebrations, the captured maw remained at the center of everyone's attention. It lay coiled in its bindings like a living shadow, its crimson eyes glowing faintly as though it were waiting, watching. Are you sure this is wise? Rithok asked, looming nearby with his arms crossed. His heavy voice carried traces of doubt. We have the beast subdued. Why not dispose of it and end this nightmare forever? Danny didn't look up, because killing it doesn't solve the real problem. Like I said before, a predator doesn't go nuts without a reason. If we don't figure out why it's been attacking your people, there's a good chance something worse is waiting to take its place. One of the younger warriors scoffed. There is nothing worse than the maw. Danny tilted his head, finally looking up with a tired smile. Oh, trust me, the universe is full of surprises. Rithok regarded him carefully. And what do you believe we will find? Answers, Danny replied, standing and stretching. But first, I need to take a closer look. The Vorrakai warriors tensed as Danny approached the maw, still bound in the energy nets. The beast's massive body twitched, its crimson eyes narrowing at his approach. Danny raised his hands in mock surrender. Easy, big guy. I'm not here to poke you. He crouched just outside its reach, studying its massive claws, its shifting form, and the faint shimmer of something unnatural that rippled across its dark hide. That's interesting. What do you see? Rithok called from a distance, clearly unwilling to get any closer. Danny pulled a small device from his belt, a compact scanner made from scavenged ship parts, and held it up toward the beast. It emitted a low hum, and the screen flickered with lines of alien text and garbled readings. I think I know what's going on here, Danny murmured, his voice suddenly serious. This isn't just some random monster. This thing's been tampered with. The Vorrakai murmured in confusion. Rethok stepped forward. Tampered with? By whom? Danny frowned, tapping the screen of his scanner. Can't say yet. But this big guy is giving off residual energy, same kind of readings I get from artificial tech. It's like someone altered it, enhanced it. Enhanced. Rethok's voice was sharp. For what purpose? Danny stood and turned to face the warriors, his expression grave. My guess? To turn it into a weapon. The camp fell silent. The Vorrakai warriors stared at the beast in a mix of horror and disbelief. For days they had viewed the maw as a relentless force of nature, something primal and untamable. But now Danny was suggesting that it wasn't just a predator, it was a victim too. And you're certain of this? Rethok pressed. Danny nodded. Yeah, someone messed with its biology, probably drove it insane in the process. No wonder it's been tearing through your people. It's not just hunting for food. It's reacting to whatever was done to it. A warrior stepped forward. Then who would do such a thing? Who would unleash such a beast upon us? That's the million-credit question, Danny replied, pocketing his scanner. But whoever they are, they're not going to like that we caught their pet. As dawn broke over the jungle, Danny and Rethok stood at the edge of the clearing, staring down at a series of deep scars carved into the earth. The marks stretched across the jungle floor in patterns too deliberate to be natural: straight lines, concentric circles, and strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with energy. This isn't natural, Danny muttered, crouching to get a closer look. It's like someone's been using the jungle as their testing ground. Rethok knelt beside him, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. I have seen markings like these before. Old ruins, buried beneath the mountains of Vorrak. My ancestors believed they were the remains of a forgotten civilization. Danny scratched his chin. Or maybe not so forgotten. Whoever left these markings might be the same ones who tampered with your monster. What are you suggesting, human? Danny stood, dusting off his knees. I'm suggesting that someone's out here playing mad scientist with alien monsters, and you guys got caught in the crossfire. Rethok's mandibles flared. And what do you propose we do? Danny grinned, his usual confidence returning. We find them, knock on their front door, and tell them to quit messing with your planet. Rethok stared at him. And if they refuse? Danny shrugged. Then we'll improvise. It's kind of my thing. The journey to the Vorrakai Mountains was long and grueling. Danny and a small team of warriors trekked through dense jungles, crossed roaring golden rivers, and climbed treacherous cliffs, following the strange symbols and energy readings that seemed to guide them. Danny led the way, relying on his scanner and an uncanny sense of direction that baffled the Vorrakai. Rethok, who had been skeptical of the human at first, found himself begrudgingly impressed. You navigate like one born to this world, Rethok remarked as they scaled a steep ridge. Danny grinned over his shoulder. Nah, I'm just good at reading maps, and not dying. By the time they reached the summit, the team was exhausted, but the sight before them drove all thoughts of fatigue from their minds. Nestled within the mountain was a massive, ancient structure, half ruined and covered in vines, but still humming faintly with energy. Danny let out a low whistle. Well, that's not ominous at all. What is this place? Rethok asked, his voice hushed. Danny pulled out his scanner and watched as the readings spiked. This is where it started. I'd bet my ship on it. The group moved cautiously toward the entrance, weapons drawn. The ancient doors creaked open as they approached, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with flickering lights and strange machinery. At the center of the room was a massive containment pod, empty now, but surrounded by claw marks identical to those left by the maw. Danny approached the pod, his expression grim. This is where they made it, or at least where they messed with it. Rethok stepped forward. Who are they? Before Danny could answer, a voice echoed through the chamber, cold, mechanical, and laced with malice. Intruders detected. The Vorrakai warriors spun, weapons raised. as the walls seemed to come alive with movement. Panels slid open, revealing a series of automated drones that hovered menacingly in the air. Danny sighed, pulling a small device from his belt. Why is it never easy? The drones fired, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Energy blasts zipped through the air, forcing the Vorrakai warriors to dive for cover. Danny, never one to panic in the face of flying lasers, flattened himself behind an overturned console and shouted over the cacophony. "Hey Rithok, you guys know how to deal with angry drones, right?" Rithok snarled, slashing a drone out of the air with a clean swing of his energy blade. "We are warriors, not technicians." Danny winced as a blast struck the console above his head, sending sparks raining down. Not exactly the answer I was hoping for. The drones whirred louder, forming a defensive wall that pulsed with artificial light. They were guarding something, the central machinery that powered the containment pod. Danny's eyes narrowed. "That's it," he shouted, pointing toward the humming machinery at the center of the room. "They're protecting the core. Take that out, and the drones will drop." Rithok turned to his warriors, mandibles flared in determination. You heard him. To the center. The Vorrakai roared in unison, charging through the hail of fire with their energy blades held high. Danny grinned as he watched them work, leaping, rolling, and slicing through drones like living battering rams. For all their earlier struggles, the Vorrakai were proving why they were such a feared warrior race. "Beautiful," Danny muttered to himself, then ducked as a drone zoomed past him, firing wildly. "Okay, my turn." He yanked a small, jury-rigged EMP device from his tool belt and sprinted toward the core, weaving through the chaos. The central machinery was massive, covered in alien symbols and pulsing faintly with green light. Wires snaked out from the base, disappearing into the walls like vines. Danny skidded to a stop, his makeshift device in hand. "All right, buddy, time to earn your paycheck." He slammed the device onto the machinery and hit a large red button with his fist. The EMP detonated with a whump, sending out a shockwave of energy that rippled through the chamber. The drones froze mid-air, their lights flickering, and then dropped to the ground with a series of metallic clangs. Silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Danny stood up and grinned, brushing dust off his shirt. And that's how humans solve a drone problem. Rithok approached, his armor scratched and glowing faintly from residual energy blasts. "You disabled the machines." "Yup," Danny replied, snapping his fingers. "No more drones, no more guards. Now we can figure out who's been messing with your planet." The Vorrakai warriors spread out, scanning the now silent chamber. Danny returned to the containment pod, kneeling beside it to inspect the markings along its base. They matched the strange symbols they'd seen carved into the jungle floor. "Rithok, come take a look at this," Danny called. The Vorrakai general approached, his massive frame towering over Danny. "What have you found?" "These symbols," Danny said, tracing one with his finger. "They're not just decorative. They're part of a control system, something ancient, but still functional. Whoever set this up figured out how to activate it. My guess? This place wasn't built to make monsters. It was built to contain them." Rithok tilted his head, his mandibles twitching thoughtfully. "Contain them?" "Yeah," Danny replied, standing and dusting his hands. "Some ancient civilization probably used this place to trap creatures like the Maw. But someone, maybe scavengers, maybe scientists, reactivated it, and in doing so, they woke up the beast. Worse, they tampered with it, made it stronger. If we hadn't stopped it, that thing could have overrun your entire planet." Rithok's expression darkened. "You believe this was deliberate?" Danny nodded. "Someone had a plan, and it backfired. Big time." The general's fists tightened. If this is true, then those responsible must answer for their actions. But first, what of the Maw? Danny looked back toward the beast, still bound but no longer thrashing. It watched them from across the chamber, its crimson eyes less hostile now, almost calm. Danny approached cautiously, stopping just out of reach. "You were just a pawn in this," Danny murmured, almost to himself. "Someone used you, pushed you past your limits." The Vorrakai warriors watched in silence as Danny slowly extended a hand toward the creature. Rethok opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself, captivated by the scene. The maw tilted its massive head, watching Danny carefully. For the first time, its eyes seemed to soften just a fraction. The snarling monster that had terrorized the Vorrakai now looked tired. "I get it," Danny said softly. "You're not evil, you're just scared, confused. And that's not your fault." The maw blinked, its crimson glow dimming slightly. Danny lowered his hand, turning back to Rethok. "We're letting it go." The warriors erupted into protests, their voices a cacophony of outrage. Rethok stepped forward, his voice booming over the others. "Explain yourself, human." Danny faced him, unwavering. "It's not a monster, it's a victim. You've seen it. Whatever was done to it, it didn't ask for this. And if we just let it go back into the jungle, it'll find its place again like any other predator." "And if you are wrong," Rethok demanded. Danny shrugged. "Then I'll take the blame. But I don't think I am." Rethok stared at him for a long moment, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. But it is on your head, human." Danny grinned. "Wouldn't have it any other way." At sunrise, the Vorrakai warriors stood in formation as the energy nets holding the maw were deactivated. The great beast uncoiled slowly, rising to its full, terrifying height. The warriors gripped their weapons tightly, ready to act if needed, but Danny stood calmly at the front, his hands in his pockets. The maw looked at him, its crimson eyes meeting his with something that felt like understanding. For a long, tense moment, the clearing was silent. Then, with a low rumble that sounded almost like a sigh, the creature turned and disappeared into the jungle, its massive form swallowed by the emerald shadows. The warriors let out a collective breath of relief. "You're crazy," human Rethok muttered, shaking his head. "Yeah," Danny replied with a grin, "but it worked, didn't it?" Weeks later, Vorrak Prime was quiet again. The maw had vanished, and there had been no further attacks. The Vorrakai had begun rebuilding their villages and hunting grounds, and for the first time in years, their people felt safe. Danny stood beside General Rethok on a hill overlooking the jungle, the warm winds rustling his hair. "You have done a great thing for my people," Rethok said, his voice softer than usual. "We misjudged you, human." Danny smiled. "Nah, you just needed a little reminder that not every problem can be solved with strength alone. Sometimes you need duct tape, snacks, and a little creative thinking." Rethok tilted his head. "You are an unusual species." Danny laughed. "You have no idea." The two of them stood in silence, watching as the sun rose over Vorrak Prime, bathing the jungle in golden light. Somewhere, deep in the shadows, the maw roamed free, no longer a monster, but a part of the world it had been born into. Rethok turned to Danny, his mandibles twitching in what could almost be a smile. "Will you stay? Our people could use one such as you." Danny shook his head, grinning. "Thanks, but I've got other planets to help, other monsters to wrangle. Besides, you've got this. Just remember, strength is great, but brains aren't half bad either." Rethok nodded. "You are always welcome on Vorrak Prime, Danny Fields." Danny slapped the general's massive shoulder with a laugh. "Appreciate it, big guy. Now, where'd I leave my ship?" As Danny wandered back toward the Vorrakai settlement, whistling to himself, Rethok watched him go with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Humans," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "Truly the strangest creatures in the universe." And somewhere deep in the jungle, a shadow moved free, unburdened, and at peace while the world around it grew just a little brighter.